So, a very warm welcome to all of you to this particular webinar hosted by Medical Education Technology Division on literature search. And I'm very happy to say that we have with us Dr. Nitin Agarwal, who is a professor in surgery at AbbVieMS in RML Hospital, who's going to take us through this webinar. And we are joined here by our team. We have our senior resident, Dr. Himanshu Agarwal, who is in the Department of Surgery at AbbVieMS, and we would be happy to hear his perspective and what he takes from this webinar. And we also have a postgraduate student, Dr. Mohit Arora from ophthalmology, who would be an addition to our webinar. So I invite Dr. Nitin Agarwal to please share his screen, and then we would have moments of pauses in between in which we could be raising our queries, and Dr. Nitin would be kind enough to help us out through that. Thank you, Dr. Nitin. And others may please mute their microphones.
Thank you, ma'am. This is a great idea, and it has been, forced on us, or enabled us to conduct this kind of an activity which we haven't before. And I guess with having Dr. Mohit and Himanshu around, it's going to really become very exciting. And we can do this on a repetitive basis, and everybody can benefit in the institute. So without further delay, I'll start the presentation, and whatever interaction that we are bound to have, we can pause in the middle, and maybe both the panelists can also want to ask questions in the middle. Again, good morning to all the participants of this webinar and panel discussion, which was the brainchild of Dr. Tarun Diwan, who has been an active member of MET for many years and very enthusiastic. So this is about effectively searching for literature for the purpose of research. By at the start, we like all our postgraduates and our trainees to be perfect in this. So it's a very basic talk, and gradually we can build it up in another workshop, because this actually is a workshop material talk which takes time and carrying out examples to actually make it perfect. So we want to search literature effectively to make it methodical, organized, systematic, to save time and increase efficiency, decrease the duplication. We want to be scientifically accurate. And the three key steps are what, where, and how, as with all scientific material. So what do we search for? We want to search for a PCOT format research topic, which is the standard way to define a research topic. And we want to look at journals, books, conference papers, whichever is the validated format, and how we are going to search. So at the end of this talk, if I'm sure that Dr. Himanshu and Mohit are already adept at this game, but if they're able to re-understand how PubMed translates the basic searches, look at other search engines, how we can use mesh and limits to make our search better, why we use Boolean operators, and how to have a search strategy. And then some other resources, which again, I try to update myself as well, as to use other online resources for, and also help patients. Nowadays, it's also very important that many patients have questions and how to guide them for better search of literature. So suppose we have a research question. Now, I'm in surgery, so the most natural questions comes from surgery. So if we are treating anal fissure and we want to test a particular therapy, so what is the effect of topical diltiazem on pain resolution? So if you look carefully, without my spelling it out, you can see that it has all the PCOT elements, and we are trying to search for the efficacy of a particular therapy on a treatment. So the basic search engine which comes to everybody's mind is Google. And can you do this on Google? So in a few minutes, I'll just show you how it can be done on Google, or what are the limitations. So if we search blindly on just the Google search engine, we get lots of data. There's no doubt about it. It's the strongest search engine in the world. And we get condensed data. As you see in the first circle, we get data which is from PubMed and other sources. We also get some unverified data. So Google search, to sum it up, is intuitive. It is artificial intelligence of the highest degree. It is comprehensive, unlimited, very fast. The questions are for our medical professionals. Is it verified adequately? Does it actually save time? Does it have limits? Because the limits are what we learn in the next few minutes are important to narrow down our research. And do experts have an adequate say in this? And what are the benefits for a pure research purpose? They have tried to modify it over the last 10 years or so by having a tab in Google, which is a Google Scholar. And Google Scholar is very useful. It does perform many functions similar to other search engines like PubMed and other medical search engines. There are some filters. On the left, if you can see that we can include citations and patients to narrow down our research, and we can, filter the time, the relevance. We also have an option of creating our library or a profile which is synced to our Google account, which everybody has. And in the advanced search options, we can have some kind of a condensing or filtration of phases. Suppose we are looking for azithromycin for treatment of typhoid fever in children. So using all the words or with the exact phrase or at least one of the words, we are able to filter our research to some extent. And so this is the result which we get, that we have comparison of azithral versus Ciplox for uncomplicated fever. But here children are not included. In the next example, we have, so it's still not very specific. And as we do this on our own, we'll realize all the benefits. So again, we try to filter the research that we want to have children, or we omit children from the at least filter and include them in the title. So we get a different result, and we do have something what we are looking for. And then we have a lot of citations in different formats, which is a very useful feature, and we can cite them by just copy pasting them. Then we can save these results. If we want to save 10 per page, or we can export them in a desired format to our files wherever we want. So this has been compared by many journals, many articles with other search engines, and there are some criticisms of Google Scholar, and that is why it has not really replaced the traditional PubMed and other search engines for medical research. That it is very powerful. Like I said, it has a lot of artificial intelligence. The main criticism is that the advanced search functions are not very reliable, and there is no controlled vocabulary. This term is very useful. We'll come to that in a few minutes. And no authority over control of journal names or author names. How they're calling it scholarly is a question of debate. That is just semantics which Google has adopted, but the vocabulary does not suggest that it's a very scholarly search. And we don't know how the coverage is so extensive and what sources have been used. And then other criticisms are that there are no limiting features and it's not so comprehensive. Only the first 1,000 can be viewed. So all these limitations make Google Scholar not the first choice for searching for medical research, but Google Scholar has some other advantages. We can use it to make our own citation list. If we have a body of publications, we can look at our citation index, and for those purposes, it is more reliable. But that is not the topic of discussion for today. Coming on to PubMed. So what is PubMed? The first question I think which Dr. Himanshu and Dr. Mohit would want to ask is that tell us what is Medline, what is PubMed, what is PubMed Central. So that question we always memorize every year once or twice, and then we forget after 2 months. So again, this is just the way that the US government has developed these databases. The original hard copy database was Index Medicus, which was in place till the late 90s. and it used to contain around 3,000-4,000 journals, at least medical journals, even more, and with around 20 million citations. And those could be accessed using the digital database which they created in the 1960s, which was the Medline. So that was the original, and it was expanded to around 5,000 journals by the end of the last century. In around 2000, they launched PubMed, which was actually a very comprehensive database, which included lots of other material from science, not only medical science. And we can just sum it up by saying that Medline is the largest subset of PubMed, and Medline contains citations using the MESH terminology, which is the medical subject headings. Another subset of PubMed is the PubMed Central, which contains other resources like books, book reviews, which is not cited directly in PubMed. It is all those articles or citations which are awaiting to be indexed in PubMed. So to conclude briefly, because this is not a lecture about PubMed, PubMed is the entire website or the database. It can contain MESH indexed Medline journals, which are the main focus of our search actually for our research purposes, for thesis, for papers. Some journals, manuscripts deposited in PubMed Central, and other databases like the NCBI bookshelf, etc. So the largest, the universe is the PubMed. This is the new screen for PubMed developed during the lockdown, and so many of us who were used to the old screen actually now feel very confused, but functionally I went through it a couple of times. It's almost the same. So I thought for the purposes of the talk, since it's unlikely that the authorities are going to go back to the original PubMed, we are going to use this to develop our research. So we see an advanced search option on the left. If we use the advanced search, we get certain filters or fields, affiliation, for author, types of the author, whether it's a book or a review, the date of the article, and other categories. And then on the right side, we have another filter where we can add these things called Boolean operators. Now these help to filter research. We'll just talk about how they do that. So if we want to improve our text word search, we avoid stop words, we identify keywords, and we combine keywords. So what are stop words? Instinctively, we know that all articles and all adjectives, these would be stop words, and comprehensively the whole list is there. So for example, perhaps, quite, anything which is instinctively not scientific would constitute a stop word, and that would not contribute to the search, and it has not been designed to contribute to the search by the developer as well. So as I told you about the PICOT formula, just to revise: population, patient, problems, intervention or exposure, comparison, control, outcome. So all the research headings or all the research summaries can come under this PICOT. If we add T, it becomes time also. Time can be implied. It need not be always specified. So PICOT elements can determine the keywords. Any of these PICOT elements can be used. And if we use and between these elements in capital letters, that's very important. It's a mathematical function, just like we used to learn way back in school, or for broadening the research. So here it's a little counterintuitive. If you use and, you actually narrow down the search, because both the keywords have to be included in the search strategy. If you use or, you actually broaden the search. And if you want to eliminate one word which you feel will always accompany the word in most situations, you use not. So another question: does renal impairment increase the mortality risk in type 2 diabetes? So population's type 2 diabetes, determinant or exposure is renal impairment, outcome is mortality. Most of the PICOT elements. So we can search number one, we can use the population with or to take care of all the synonyms of type 2 diabetes. We can use synonyms for renal impairment, kidney, GFR, glomerular filtration, etc. It's all for outcome. So MESH is the way that PubMed scores over any other search engine, and it is the largest used medical web search in the world. It outscores the next by millions of people per day. So it's going to remain like that for many years. So MESH is a controlled vocabulary terms, and they have been categorized to include all mesh categories, then chemicals and drugs, complex mixtures. So they have a algorithm. And suppose you want to look for measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. So the search will take you through all these algorithms on its own. What is the advantage of this? The advantage is that it increases the precision of your research, gets articles that are about your topic, even if the terminology has not been used by the author. By having this algorithm in place, the author may have missed that terminology, but you're going to get that article because of the algorithmic nature of the database. And it allows you to use subheadings like therapy, diagnosis, genetics, etc. So PubMed, the old PubMed, the screen which we all used to, has the traditional filter. It has so many databases, mostly genetic databases, which are not of much use to us, but they contain much more data than actually what medical literature has. If you choose MESH there and you go to the MESH database and use PubMed together, you will come to a screen like this, where for any disease entity, they will give you all the subheadings in the, it basically breaks down MESH for you. If you really want to not sift through thousands of articles and get down to, few parts of typhoid fever, like for example, you want to talk about enteric fever, and you want to talk about drug therapy. So you just talk about drug therapy, you tick these, restrict to the MESH major topic, and do not include other terms. And you add this to the search builder. And that's how you get, you just get 28 articles which talk about the particular drug used for typhoid fever in children. So that is the way that we have filtered our research. There are thousands of other functions which we can cover only when we take a complete workshop on this. But if we know about these functions, we can do this on our own. So we can also filter our article for clinical trials, reviews, free full text or abstracts, last 10 years, so many other filters. And I'm sure this generation, which Dr. Himanshu and Dr. Mohit have come through, they are more used to using online filters because, all the online shopping is also done by these filters. So it's not really difficult for anybody who is even wee bit screen savvy to do this. A few more functions, we can look at truncations, where if we want to include both child and children, we just put a kind of a symbol on that, and it will give us both. If we keep quotation marks, we'll keep both those words together, and parentheses will also combine it, just like and. But we can use and parentheses to further develop our research. Like I talked about the Boolean operators. So if we want to have and, we can have pregnancy and immunization. Both are included when a search is for and. And if we have or, it increases the scope of the article which are being searched. If no Boolean operators are used, it assumes and. That's important to remember. So if you want to have a bigger search, you use or by default. If something is written in an alphabet form, it assumes that it's for author. For example, Agarwal N. So N will be for author. It will not look at any other term. And if the journal name or version is typed, it searches only in that journal. Another important function of PubMed is that one can create an account and save your articles, save you the trouble of repeatedly looking at the same search again and again. So you can save all these articles in any format and you create a file, or you can mail it to yourself, or you can keep it in PubMed itself by creating an account, and there's an option of My Collection. So all this we already knew, and we kind of revised it again. What PubMed lacks is that it has been a long-standing criticism that local cultural context is lacking, and we're not able to retrieve articles very effectively from developing countries, because developing countries definitely find it a hurdle to index their journals on PubMed. And of course, a lot of research which is contextual and important to us is lost in that fashion. And of course, many journals which are relevant are not indexed on PubMed. So those are logistics concerns, and they will gradually be sorted out. But functionally, we cannot fault that PubMed gives us the most value for our time. We have an Indian indexing body, which was started in '85. It is still not really widely in use. It has a few journals which are from various national associations of different specialities. And if we feel that we need to look at only Indian articles or those we're not likely to find on PubMed, we can use this. And the last function I want to talk about PubMed is if you want to submit a paper and we want to look at index journals or the entire exhaustive list. So there's a very nice tab here, Journals in NCBI databases, which gives you all the journals on a topic or disease or whichever keyword you want to use. And you can filter it, either referencing it from NCBI or index for Medline, and all those information comes here. You also get the journal's official website, so you can directly go to the journal and check out whether it's paid or unpaid, all those other details. That information does not come in this list, unfortunately, but you can look at the journal individually. You can have a list of shortlisted list of journals you want to submit your research in. That also. So the key points about Google and PubMed, which are 99% of our work, is that we use them extensively. We use mesh guidelines wherever possible, and we use all these truncation, quotation, Boolean operators, avoid stop words, and keep trying till you improve your search. So another, just a table from a interesting publication which compared PubMed and Google Scholar. So like I said before, they now score evenly on most counts using a Boolean terms, providing the search limits. But even now, because of lack of mesh in Google Scholar, they're not able to give you the specific clinical category or the subject matter and allow the use of truncation. So that would be a limiting factor in Google Scholar. Otherwise, it would be almost as good. And some advantages of Google Scholar is that it will give you instinctively full screen, full text publications more often than PubMed. So I would interrupt myself here for a few minutes if people just want to ask a few questions with the permission of Dr. Taru.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nitin. So I think we have Dr. Mohit and Dr. Himanshu with us. So Dr. Himanshu, from the perspective of a senior resident, there's anything else arises in your mind, any question about what
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to ask one thing. Sir, since so many search engines are available, so what are the minimum databases to be searched when we are going through, when we are searching for a literature for a research purpose? Like they are Embase, they are Medline, they are PubMed, they are Cochrane, everything is there. So we have to narrow down our search.
Right. So that's a very good question, Himanshu. So I mentioned earlier that if you're a postgraduate student and you're searching for your thesis, so let's be really specific. So in that situation, I would say just go for PubMed and at the most Google Scholar, because some articles which are not indexed and your thesis might have some local context, yes, which may not be very internationally or I'll not say relevant, but not really important in that context. So you might not get, say, journals from Nigeria or somewhere where a similar study is being done. So in that situation, you can combine both Google Scholar and PubMed. Otherwise, like you mentioned, Embase and Cochrane Review, I'll cover that in the next part. That is for a different purpose. That really will not be at a training level or when we are looking at looking for articles for developing our study, initially. For that, I think PubMed is good enough.
Okay. And one more thing, sir, what do we exactly mean by index paper? And can non-index paper be included in our journals or in our research?
So again, I think, ma'am, would you like to take that up?
Yeah, actually, Himanshu, there are different indexing, let's say, sites. So it could be
Yes.
indexed in one and not indexed in the other. So when we say generally, so far we have been following guidelines whether it is indexed in Medline or not. But now I think with the availability of so many indexing portals, it totally depends upon the place you are applying to, or the journal, or for a job or anything. When you say that it is indexed in Scopus, it is indexed in, you have to say in which particular indexing system it is indexed. So although we still give the highest level to PubMed indexing,
PubMed.
even now, yeah, but that does not mean that others are not good enough. So you just have to know where it is indexed and whether the place you're applying for or something, it honors it or not. But Science Citation Index is a good place to check whether it is whether your journal or thing is included in SCI or not. So that is valid in most of the places. So
Okay,
that's
thank you.
So Himanshu, just to sum up in 2 lines, what ma'am is trying to say is that if somebody asks for an index paper, your question should be, which indexing do you want? And if somebody fails to mention that, by default, I think everybody would accept PubMed world over. So it was a synonym for PubMed indexing actually. But over the last 20, 30 years, everybody started having their own indexing system. So now everybody qualifies it that, yes, this time we're asking for. So MCI says that, accredited articles are accepted from PubMed indexing, from, like ma'am said, Web of Science, and couple of index. Copernicus was there for some time. Now you have other Scopus also on board. So traditionally, without qualification, it is PubMed, but then it would be qualified for you to have it indexed on these. But if you want to further your research, you should try and have as many PubMed indexed articles as, because that would remain standard for a long time. I don't think there's a question about that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And Mohit, would you like to ask anything?
Good morning, sir.
Good
Sir,
morning.
that was a very good talk, sir. Sir, I want to ask about the mesh system more.
Yeah. So mesh, Mohit, is essentially, like I said, it's just, it's, yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So because the topic had to be covered in limited time, mesh can, it can be a complete workshop on just how to use the mesh effectively. So mesh is just like, a kind of a algorithmic approach to the search. So, like you maintain files in the medical record section, just take it to your example. So you would take it, by wards or by bed numbers or by the units the patients are under. And ultimately, they could try and classify it by the diseases that the patients have been suffering from. Similarly, mesh tries to categorize all the diseases, just like a textbook format, into algorithmic form. So if you are searching for, suppose, in your specialty, suppose you're searching for cataract, and you want to look at certain treatments for cataract, which are not available in other countries. So, the literature may not have those newer modalities by those words. Suppose you want to include a treatment for search, which only a couple of people have done. But by using mesh, the system will be able to give you certain articles which are close to the topic without you actually searching for it also. That is system is intuitive, and it is based on an algorithm. Like I showed you that algorithm about vaccines. So if you search for one of the vaccines, because they go together, measles, mumps, rubella, in most of the world systems are being administered together, it will search for all 3 vaccines. Are you able to follow?
Yes, sir.
So the more we use it, the more we'll understand. I'm sure that, because you use Amazon and everything every day, we never had that 20 years back. So for you, it'll be a question of a few days of practice. I can assure you that.
And I think
Thank you, sir.
within this, when we want, as Dr. Nitin had showed us this screen, in which you have mesh keywords. When you go on that, you can actually use the drop down when you go to the category you want, and you find the word cataract would be there in pathology also, and it would be there in ophthalmology also. So you could get a very good search results. So that's more scientific way of utilizing PubMed services.
Actually, because of this time bound exercise, I know I'm not doing justice to the entire talk, but it's a good start. And whenever we have a physical workshop, then these things are actually practiced in person. We make people do exercises, and that's how actually one learns. But then I'm sure that both these guys can do that.
Yeah, they can go back and right. So can we take further from here, Dr. Nitin?
I think we'll take it. And I think the next level of discussion we'll do towards the last few slides.
Okay.
If that's okay. Right.
Please.
So another, is the slides and everything are visible? Are we still on screen sharing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll resume the slides. So another thing which we frequently encounter in our conversation, and when we go for a career advancement, etc., are the levels of evidence. So how to actually put it into, how to articulate it. Everybody knows inherently what it means, but it's difficult to articulate because it's a lot of science, it's a lot of semantics. So the acquisition and classification of scientific evidence and these subheadings, subsequent formulation of recommendations is the development of clinical practice guidelines. And the standard system, which has been given a very easy to use mnemonic, is the GRADE system. So GRADE system has to be expanded into grading of recommendations, assessment, development, and evaluation. It initially classifies the evidence into high or low, coming from experimental studies going all the way to randomized controlled trials, etc. And the strength of recommendation is based not only on the quality of evidence, but also on a series of other factors like the risk benefit. So that's where the clinical input comes. It's not just that you show in data that you have these results and you have, your RCTs can show you good statistics, but the clinician also factors in other things like risk benefit balance, values and preferences for the patients in the local milieu or the local context, and the uses of resources or cost. So this is the standard pyramid we use for level of evidence. It is the lowest level is of course in vitro research, going on all the way to case reports, case series, case control studies. Each is better than the preceding one, cohort studies, and then capping off at randomized controls, especially double-blinded, placebo-controlled, randomized controlled studies, and if available, a good, well-structured systematic review or a meta-analysis. This is not always possible because this means that there are a lot of RCTs already done for that topic. Only then will you have a good systematic review in place. Otherwise, these can always, the level is almost the same. Now, another confusion which I can anticipate a question coming from Himanshu, because I know that he does this a lot and he's a very voracious publisher, if I may say so. And you will have different guidelines by different bodies for similar to the grade system. So this slide is not to read, it's just to show us that people may call level of evidence by level 1, 2, 5, or they may say high, moderate, low. It just depends on which system. On the left, this is coming from the British committee, which in 2014 drew the guidelines for Hodgkin's lymphoma. And in the process, they gave us a broad research recommendation format for high, moderate, and low. Similarly, the most commonly used one, which I talked about right now, came from the RCOG in the UK, which was for guidelines for thromboembolic disease in pregnancy. And they gave us this 1, 2, 3, 4 system, which is most commonly followed. Similarly, you have other systems. So, but if you combine all the two, it essentially means that the systematic review or a collection of RCTs statistically combined into a meta-analysis gives you the highest level of evidence. It may not always be possible. So that doesn't mean that we can't have evidence. Like in surgery, for example, we are not able to prove anything by randomized controlled trials because surgery is difficult to be blinded and some amount of bias is inevitable. So in surgery, most of the data comes from cohort studies or even retrospective studies. Most of the epidemiological data in study, and I'm sure that's the same with ophthalmology because it's a surgical branch, and it comes from retrospective studies. So it's a context of the search which is very important. So in that context, Dr. Himanshu, you asked a very relevant question that if we are looking for a high level of evidence paper, or if we want to answer a question, or if we are intending to formulate a systematic review within our unit or our department, that's when we look at these specific databases, which are Cochrane Library and so on. So Cochrane Library is basically a collection of systematic reviews on each topic. And these have been updated regularly. They cost a lot to do this. It is maintained by a philanthropist who goes by the name of Archie Cochrane, who started this site. And now it is the world's most reputed site for as a depository of systematic reviews. Mm-hmm. And one can search Google to come to the main page. And here you can see that the reviews are either by their name or by the trials that they entail or by the answers. So if you have to browse by the topic, you have it alphabetically. Each topic is alphabetically. And then if you suppose you search for something related to fibromyalgia. So you have a question. Systematic review basically starts with a question, a research question. So you can search by that question or you can search by the topic, and it'll give you all the systematic reviews, which will, so there are not going to be too many, because like I said, that systematic reviews by themselves are a collection of, articles and on a particular topic. So not everybody conducts systematic reviews, and they would be problem solving in nature. By reading systematic reviews, you would have quite a few ideas of how to solve your problem. So if you have to, again, the same similar search methodology is now available on this website, not to the tune of PubMed, but you can look at and Boolean operators. And if you look at anticonvulsant therapy for status epilepticus, you would get some systematic reviews answering a few clinical questions. So I hope that partly answers Dr. Himanshu's question, and it would be used in a very specific context. Coming on to situations where we have to educate patients, family, provide teleconsultation, very important since the last year, because we can't get out of it now. It's going to be at least part of our job in the next few years. You want to do a medical web search and you don't know where to start. You have some conflicting information coming from various, or you want to confirm a few things. So you have to have a system where you can, use Google search or some other search engine and, verify that information. How do you verify the veracity of the website which contains? So there's a independent non-governmental body called the Health on the Net Foundation. Its mnemonic is HORN, and they have a code or a stamp, which is the HORN code. So HORN code is the largest. There are so many. I'm only covering the most common situations in every area so that we don't have to really be exhaustive. If we know about the HORN code, we can look for it, and it is allied to the World Health Organization. So you can be sure that whatever is verified by the HORN code is a reliable medical information and not quackery. So this is also quite exhaustive, and if you see their process, they have a few principles. When you want to apply for a horn code. If you're giving out medical information on a website, you can apply for this horn code. So they look at who authors this content, what is the audience, what is the privacy, all the financial disclosure, advertising policy, where any conflict of interest is obvious in your website. So after all this, they give you this seal or a horn code where the website is a Health on Net certified website. And especially for patients, you want to give them information which is reliable, so that they don't throw it back on your face, or they get confused by the information. So you can very easily give them this particular information, and it's very easy to use. One can go through it. I'm sure I don't have to take everybody through the way of using these. Another important, now we're in a medical institution, and what is claimed to be the second most searched medical site is UpToDate. Now it is owned by a big publishing house, which is Wolters Kluwer's. At the outset, I'll say the only thing which actually holds us back is the cost. This is a paid website, unlike a PubMed or other things we were talking about earlier. So the cost is the only thing which, otherwise I would rate this without any conflict of interest as a topmost website for students and for health professionals. It has got paid reviews which are updated sequentially, maybe every 2 months, on topics like bedside clinical problems. For example, we are talking about tuberculous drugs, and we have commonly, when you prescribe them in our wards, we have hepatitis induced by anti-tubercular therapy. And if we look at PubMed and we don't have adequate material, or we don't really know what to do in those situations, so these experts, which are highly paid by UpToDate, they will write verified reviews on these topics and provide them on UpToDate, and that can be used on the bedside as a reliable resource to solve your problems. They can be used in teaching seminars. You can use them just verbatim. They're in that seminar format, and it would not be wrong to use them because it is not copy paste. It has actually been researched very thoroughly. The only thing, like I said, was that it is paid, and payment is quite a lot. It would have to be covered by an institutional kind of a system where one could subscribe to it on an annual or 5-yearly basis. We used to have it earlier, and I'm sure we're in the process of reinventing our license. So this is the page for UpToDate. It shows us that you want the information for nosocomial pneumonia. So do you want patient-oriented information? Do you want pediatrics, adults? And you would get these reviews or these seminar format. And it's not that they'll not tell you the source. At the end of each of these reviews, you have an exhaustive list of articles or citations, which are similar to the PubMed or any other format. And if you are interested in knowing how they derived this review, you can read those articles. But what they're doing is they're saving you that process of reading those 80, 90 articles on this topic and summarizing it for you in a very, kind of verified format. And what we must know is that the ERMED, or the digital system at AIIMS NML library, is giving us, presently we are in the process of free access to UpToDate through the ERMED consortium. So RML and our institute has the ERMED. We subscribe to it, and through that website, like on this page, if we go through this page, we can actually go to UpToDate. And I actually personally also advocate UpToDate to the extent of sounding actually employed by them. But I find it so useful, and I'm sure that once Dr. Himanshu and Dr. Mohit also share my enthusiasm, they'll understand why I'm saying so. So I think that's where we stop for today. And this can always be part 1. And with such a good idea, we can take it forward in the next few sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Right.
Thank you. It was absolutely wonderful. In fact, even for me, in spite of knowing that we have ERMED, I never used UpToDate. So it's like an eye opener even for me. It's fantastic. I mean, somebody's already done the hard work for you. It's so good.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
up to date, ma'am. I mean, I always, whenever I meet people, I advocate it to the extent of, sounding like their spokesman. So I have to kind of withhold myself at times because it's ultimately a paid site.
Right, right.
And even for individuals, I think it costs $500 a year on one mobile phone.
Okay.
So that's not a very bad deal for the
At
kind of
least for institutes, I mean, when we have it, we should be using it more often. And one more thing I would just like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to clarify, like for everybody who started using PubMed or even in Cochrane, it's a very good idea to sign in and have your own account so that your searches keep getting, stored there and you can come back to them. Otherwise, I remember as a PG or early on, I would use and I would search and sit for 3 hours and do everything. And then later on, when I come back after a week or 2 weeks, then it'll be all lost. So one must make a practice of signing in, creating an account and signing in while doing your searches. I think
that was the NCBI account, which I showed a few slides.
Right.
Like I said, emphasis on certain points in a talk of 40 minutes will be missed definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to add a point to this fantastic talk I think we have had here. And Dr. Himanshu and Dr. Mohit, can we have just quick last questions with you, because then we are going to end the recording very soon.
Yes, ma'am, sure. Apart from the discussion, sir has talked very great. He has left no stone unturned. But just one question: can conference paper be counted as publications?
Okay, Himanshu, that's a great question. So it can actually, the conference paper per se is not a research publication, but every conference publishes their material in the form of a souvenir or an abstract book. So that abstract book has your summary of your conference paper. So at best, your conference paper is worth an abstract in that book. Now that book itself, is, unless the conference is really high level, maybe world over, we'll have just about 100 conferences per year, which will be equatable to, their souvenir is equal to an index journal. There are conferences like that. There are consensus guideline conferences and so on, where your talk will be equated to a research paper, even as an abstract, but that would be few and far between. So I think that when you go to a conference with a paper, all papers are not of the same value. So when you write original articles, definitely their weightage is much more. But then you have the other fillers, you have all these abstracts from conferences. So that shows your entire, when you have your resume, you can't have original articles more than, even if you're really voracious like yourself, you can't have more than 5 or 8 per year. It's not possible. It's just not possible. So you'll have all these things important, at the end of your resume, you'll have these 8 or 9 conference abstracts also as part of your list. And that's where it's counted.
I think, Himanshu, if you are on ResearchGate, you will find that you can actually add on your presentations there in your profile. So that will add to your bio data. Plus, when you are writing an article and you want to quote some conference proceeding, so there is a format for that too. So that means it is important. So it's only that when your biodata becomes so exhaustive with publications, you stop writing abstract publications. Exactly. But nevertheless, it is a valid thing. So it is given importance.
Just to add here,
just lower in the run, but yeah. Sorry, Nitin.
Sorry, just to add quickly, because this should be part of our this capsule, that ResearchGate again is a private body and we can't replicate it in our own setup. We already have a system. UGC, actually, if you go to the UGC website, it was my short side not to include that snapshot here. The UGC website gives you points for each of these things, whether you go to an international conference as a delegate, whether you go as a presenter, whether you go as an author. They have really exhaustively classified each and every achievement of yours in your career at different levels. If you look for that, if I find it, I'll definitely mail it to everybody.
Yeah, please.
And that gives you points for each and every activity that you do. And there are institutions who take this up very seriously, and they judge you by that point system, the UGC point system.
Okay.
So I was in an institution like that before, and I have done it earlier, but the point system has actually been developed even further now. So I'll send you the latest ones. And that would give you the idea of what you're asking, that, you know, where exactly that thing stands, how many points actually it stands for.
Yeah, that's really nice. And we would all love to have that link so that we can actually utilize the UGC services there. Anything
Right,
else
right.
as a student, Mohit, anything that comes to your mind when you are searching? I think so many things have been handled in this presentation that as you keep doing, you will keep on learning. But if there's anything particularly you want to ask, you're most welcome.
Right now, no.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nitin. I think it is really exhaustive and it has stirred in the minds, you know, the desire to go back, do your searches more methodically, and before you forget what all you've taught us. Thankfully, we'll
And
have
there
this
is much
opportunity to
more.
come back to it.
Because of this time limit, I had 180 slides, to be
Oh
honest.
my
Because,
God,
you know,
yeah.
I prepared it like a workshop.
Wonderful.
And then
So
I
we
cut down 100 slides.
Yeah.
So I'm sure these people have so many questions, but, you know, when we have it at a workshop level, we can take it up from there.
Fantastic. And they would go on to, you know, to teach their fellows and juniors and
Definitely.
seniors.
They can just discuss, you know, while having coffee with each other. It's that kind of a topic. It's not something which you have to,
Okay,
you know,
fantastic.
you just discuss it all the time. You improve
Right.
yourself, and that's how it goes. Yeah.
Right. So thank you very much, Dr. Nitin and Dr.
you,
Himanshu
ma'am.
and Dr. Mohit
Thank you,
for
ma'am.
being here as panelists,
Thanks.
and hope for another session very soon. Thank you.
Very soon. Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.